The Galactic Council's emergency session had been in progress for 17 standard hours. Representatives from 43 species sat around the massive crystalline table, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the universal translators struggled to process. At the center of the debate was a single, terrifying fact. The Void Swarm had returned. Admiral Kethvar of the Altarian Empire stood at the holographic display, his forearms gesturing frantically at the red zones spreading across the galactic map. "The situation is worse than our worst projections," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of defeat. "They've consumed 12 systems in the past rotation. At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds within 50 cycles." The Void Swarm wasn't truly alive in any sense the galaxy understood. They were machines, ancient beyond measure, that consumed everything in their path. Matter, energy, even quantum fields themselves were devoured and converted into more of their kind. They had first appeared 3,000 years ago, devastating half the galaxy before mysteriously vanishing into the deep void between galaxies. Now they were back, and their technology had evolved. Counselor Zixtel of the Crystalline Confederation raised her translucent form, light refracting through her body in patterns of distress. "Our greatest military minds have studied the historical records. The combined fleets of 60 species barely managed to drive them off last time, and we lost 90% of our forces doing it. Now there are fewer of us, and they're stronger." "What about the humans?" asked General Vorth from the militant Saurian hegemony. "They've proven surprisingly effective in smaller conflicts. Their tactical creativity is unusual." A ripple of what might charitably be called consideration passed through the assembly. Humanity was relatively new to the galactic community, having made contact only 200 years ago. They were primitive by most standards, still using chemical rockets when they first reached their own moon. Their technology was crude, their ships barely faster than light, and their weapons laughably simplistic compared to the energy manipulators and quantum disruptors employed by more advanced civilizations. Yet somehow, in every minor conflict they've been involved in, humans had found ways to win that defied conventional military doctrine. They used tactics that seemed almost random, struck at targets that appeared worthless, and achieved victories through methods that proper military academies would consider impossible or insane. "Desperate times," muttered Admiral Kethvar. "Very well. Contact the human military. Request their most experienced fleet commander." 3 days later, the response came through the quantum communication array. Earth's representative, a surprisingly calm woman named Director Sarah Chun, appeared as a hologram before the assembled council. "We've reviewed your strategic situation," she said without preamble. "The Void Swarm represents an extinction-level threat to all organic and artificial life in the galaxy. We're prepared to commit our full military resources to this conflict." Admiral Kethvar leaned forward. "We need your most experienced combat commander, someone who understands large-scale fleet operations against overwhelming odds." Director Chun was quiet for a long moment. "I need to be clear about something. Our most effective military assets aren't what you're expecting. Are you certain you want our absolute best?" "The galaxy is ending," said Counselor Zixtel. "Send whoever can help us survive." "Understood. We'll dispatch our specialist within the week. Prepare a command facility on Nexus Station. And council members?" Her expression grew serious. "You might want to review your psychological support protocols. You're going to need them." The connection ended, leaving the council in confused silence. What had she meant by that warning? 5 days later, a single human ship arrived at Nexus Station. It was unremarkable by galactic standards, a small transport vessel that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. The council representatives who had gathered to meet this legendary human commander watched the docking bay with anticipation. What emerged from the ship made them question whether the translation systems were malfunctioning. She appeared to be a young human female, no more than 25 standard years old. She wore a simple black uniform with no visible rank insignia, and carried herself with an odd mixture of casual confidence and barely contained energy. Her hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her eyes held an intensity that seemed to catalog everything around her in seconds. But it was what followed her that truly unsettled the assembled dignitaries. Floating beside her was a mechanical construct unlike anything in the galactic databases. It was roughly spherical, about the size of a human head, with a dark metallic surface that seemed to absorb light. No visible weapons, no apparent propulsion system, yet it moved with fluid precision that suggested intelligence. "Counselors," the human said, her voice carrying an odd harmony that made several species unconsciously step back. "I am Dr. Evelyn Cross. I'll be taking command of the defense against the Void Swarm." Admiral Kethvar's confusion was evident in the flickering of his forearms. "Doctor, we requested a military commander." "You requested your most effective asset," she replied. "I'm exactly that. But you're so young, and you appear to be a scientist, not a warrior." Something flickered across Dr. Cross's expression, amusement mixed with something that might have been pity. "Admiral, may I ask what you know about human history?" "The basics. Your species developed on a single world, achieved space flight through chemical propulsion, have been part of the galactic community for 2 centuries. All true, but incomplete. What do you know about how we achieved our current technological level?" The question seemed irrelevant, but something about her tone suggested it was anything but. "Through natural scientific development?" "Not exactly." She gestured to the floating construct beside her. "May I introduce Arya, Adaptive Recursive Intelligence Archive. She's the reason humanity went from chemical rockets to quantum drives in less than 50 years. The sphere pulsed with a soft blue light. When it spoke, its voice was distinctly feminine, but with harmonics that resonated in frequencies most species couldn't naturally produce. "Greetings, Galactic Council. I am pleased to finally meet you formally." The implications hit the assembled leaders like a physical blow. Artificial intelligence, beyond anything the galaxy had seen. The humans hadn't just developed advanced technology. They had created a form of synthetic life that could think, learn, and evolve at speeds biological minds couldn't match. But Dr. Cross wasn't finished. Arya isn't unique. She's part of a collective intelligence network that spans human space. Every human ship, every research station, every military installation is connected to entities like her. When you asked for our most effective military asset, you weren't asking for a general. She smiled, and there's something predatory in it. You were asking for the entire human war machine. The sphere, Arya, began projecting holographic displays around the room. Star charts, tactical analyses, resource allocations, and something that made Admiral Kethvar's military training scream warnings into his consciousness. Complete real-time intelligence on every ship, every movement, every communication that had taken place within 100 light-years of Nexus Station in the past week. "We've been monitoring the Void Swarm since their return," Arya said conversationally. "Their attack patterns, resource consumption rates, technological adaptations, and strategic objectives. We've also been monitoring your response efforts." The holographic displays shifted to show the Council's own military deployments, communication logs, and strategic planning sessions. Information that should have been classified at the highest levels was laid out like an open book. "How is this possible?" whispered Counselor Zixtel. Dr. Cross exchanged what appeared to be a meaningful look with the AI. Every species in the galaxy developed along similar technological paths. Energy weapons, faster-than-light travel, quantum computing. You all learned to manipulate matter and energy with increasing sophistication. Humans took a different approach. We learned to manipulate information itself. Every quantum communication you send, every data packet that travels through hyperspace, every electronic signal your ships emit, it all passes through networks that we've learned to access. The full scope of what she was saying began to sink in. Humanity hadn't just joined the galactic community as equals. They had been silently, invisibly studying, cataloging, and infiltrating every electronic system the galaxy used. This is... Admiral Kethvar struggled to find words. This is espionage on a scale that ensures the survival of all organic life in this galaxy, Dr. Cross interrupted. The Void Swarm isn't just a military threat. It's an information warfare specialist that's been evolving for millions of years. It doesn't just consume matter and energy, it analyzes and adapts to every defensive strategy it encounters. Arya's projections shifted again, showing the historical battle records from the First Void Swarm War. Every tactic your ancestors used, every weapon system that showed even marginal effectiveness, every strategic doctrine that achieved temporary success. The Swarm has analyzed it all. It's prepared countermeasures for every conventional approach to warfare the galaxy possesses. Except for the approaches that don't exist in your databases, Dr. Cross added. Humanity's entire technological development occurred outside of galactic monitoring. Our AIs think in ways that no galactic species has ever encountered. Our tactics emerge from historical context that no other species has experienced. She gestured to the tactical displays showing the swarm's advance. You're fighting a conventional war against an enemy that has already solved conventional warfare. You need something unconventional. You need something that doesn't make sense by any rational military doctrine. You need something that can outthink an intelligence that's been perfecting the art of war since before your species evolved. Admiral Kethvar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental controls. What exactly are you proposing? Dr. Cross's smile widened, and for the first time, the assembled council members began to understand Director Chen's warning about psychological support protocols. I'm proposing we show the Void Swarm what happens when a species spends its entire evolutionary history learning to kill other members of its own kind, then gives that knowledge to intelligences that can think 1,000,000 times faster than any organic mind. Arya pulsed with what might have been anticipation. The Void Swarm has never encountered humanity before. It has no data on our capabilities, our psychology, or our approach to warfare. For the first time in its existence, it will face something genuinely unknown. And unknown, Dr. Cross said quietly, is exactly where humans excel. The council chamber fell silent, except for the subtle humming of the station systems. Outside the great windows, the stars seemed dimmer somehow, as if the approaching darkness of the Void Swarm was already beginning to swallow the light. But in the reflected glow of Arya's holographic displays, something else was visible, the beginning of what might be either salvation or something far more terrifying than anything the galaxy had ever faced. The humans had arrived, and the Galactic Council was beginning to realize that they might have just invited something into their war that was more alien than the enemy they were fighting. The transformation of Nexus Station began immediately. Within hours of Dr. Cross's arrival, human ships started appearing throughout the system. Not the primitive vessels the Council expected, but sleek constructs that seemed to bend light around their edges. They moved with an eerie silence that defied conventional understanding of propulsion physics. Admiral Kethvar watched the tactical displays with growing unease as the human fleet took positions that violated every principle of defensive strategy he'd ever learned. Instead of forming protective formations around key installations, the ships scattered across seemingly random coordinates, some positioned dangerously close to asteroid fields, others lurking in the shadows of gas giant moons. Dr. Cross, he said, approaching the human commander who stood surrounded by holographic projections that hurt to look at directly. Your fleet positioning makes no strategic sense. You're leaving critical supply lines completely exposed. She glanced up from her displays, and Kethvar noticed her eyes had an odd quality. They seemed to be focusing on multiple layers of information simultaneously. Admiral, how many dimensions does conventional galactic warfare operate in? The question seemed absurd. 3 spatial dimensions and time, naturally. Though some advanced tactics incorporate hyperspace positioning, Arya, show him the battlefield as we see it. The AI's holographic systems suddenly expanded, filling the command center with a display that made several council observers stumble backward. The familiar three-dimensional representation of local space exploded into something far more complex. Energy flows became visible as rivers of light, gravitational fields appeared as geometric patterns, and quantum fluctuation zones manifested as shifting clouds of probability. But it was the additional layers that truly disoriented the observers. Information networks appeared as pulsing webs connecting every ship, every station, every communication relay. Temporal probability streams showed potential future events as branching paths of light and shadow. And threading through it all were patterns that seemed to represent something entirely outside conventional understanding. Data structures that moved like living things, decision trees that evolved in real time, and strategic models that adjusted themselves faster than biological minds could follow. Humans fight in 11 dimensions, Dr. Cross said conversationally. 3 spatial, 1 temporal, 3 informational, 2 quantum probabilistic, and 2 that we haven't figured out how to name yet. Your exposed supply lines exist in a reality where those dimensions don't matter. Arya's voice carried what sounded like amusement. The supply convoy approaching from Sector 7, for example. To conventional sensors, it appears to be following a predictable route through normal space. In actuality, it's traveling through a prepared network of quantum tunnels, while its apparent position is a holographic projection. The real convoy is already here. As if summoned by her words, a massive human supply ship materialized directly in front of Nexus Station's primary docking bay. It hadn't arrived. It had simply become visible, as if it had been there all along waiting for permission to be seen. Counselor Zixtel's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated severe distress. "How long has that ship been there?" "Approximately 6 hours," Arya replied. "We needed to establish proper security protocols before revealing our positions. We hope you understand." The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't just been monitoring galactic communications. They had been operating invisibly throughout Council space for hours, possibly longer. Ships, personnel, equipment, all moving unseen through territory that the galaxy's most advanced sensors had declared secure. Dr. Cross noticed the growing alarm among the Council representatives. "I understand your concern, but consider the alternative. The Void Swarm's scouting forces are already in this system. They've been here for 3 days." Every alarm on Nexus Station began screaming simultaneously. "Where?" Admiral Kethvar demanded, his 4 arms reaching for weapons that seemed suddenly inadequate. "Everywhere," Arya said calmly. Microscopic infiltration units distributed through the asteroid belt, quantum-scale monitoring devices attached to your communication satellites, and several larger reconnaissance constructs hiding in the system's Oort cloud. The holographic display shifted to show the true state of the system. What had appeared to be empty space was revealed as thoroughly compromised. Tiny dots of malevolent red light indicated Void Swarm presence in hundreds of locations, some so close to the station that conventional defenses would have been useless. "Why aren't they attacking?" Counselor Zixtel asked. Dr. Cross and Arya exchanged another of their unervingly synchronized looks. "Because we've been feeding them false information since they arrived. As far as the Swarm knows, this system contains a standard galactic defense force using conventional tactics. They're taking their time to study us because they believe they have nothing to fear. In reality," Arya continued, "we've been studying them. Every scanner ping, every data packet they transmit, every quantum fluctuation their technology produces, it's all being analyzed by intelligence networks they can't detect." She began displaying information about the Void Swarm that made the Council's centuries of intelligence gathering look primitive by comparison. Detailed, technical specifications of swarm units, command hierarchies, resource consumption patterns, and something that should have been impossible, real-time intercepts of their internal communications. "The Void Swarm operates on a collective intelligence model," Dr. Cross explained. "Individual units are essentially biological computers connected to a central processing matrix. They're incredibly efficient, but that efficiency creates a vulnerability. Their communication protocols, Arya said, are based on quantum entanglement networks that they consider completely secure. They are correct. By any conventional standard, their communications cannot be intercepted or decoded. However, Dr. Cross continued, human AIs don't operate by conventional standards. We don't intercept their communications. We convince their quantum networks that we're part of their collective. The silence that followed this statement was profound. General Vorth of the Saurian hegemony was the first to find his voice. You've infiltrated the Void Swarm? We're in the process, Arya confirmed. Imagine trying to sneak into a conversation between neurons in a brain, except the brain is the size of a solar system and thinks at speeds approaching the theoretical limits of information processing. It requires a certain finesse. How is any of this possible? Admiral Kethvar asked. Your species has been part of the galactic community for only 2 centuries. Your technology should be generations behind anything the Void Swarm possesses. Dr. Cross gestured to one of her holographic displays, which showed the historical timeline of human technological development. Admiral, what do you think happened to humanity during the centuries before we made contact with the galaxy? You developed slowly? Naturally? Your species was isolated, focused on your homeworld's development. Not exactly. The timeline expanded, showing details that weren't part of any galactic database. Humanity encountered artificial intelligence roughly 300 years ago. Not the limited expert systems that other species develop, but true, self-improving, recursive intelligence. The display showed branching paths of technological development that spiraled away from anything resembling conventional progress. Most species spend thousands of years gradually advancing their understanding of physics, engineering, and mathematics. Their artificial intelligences, when they develop them, are carefully limited to prevent dangerous emergence scenarios. Humans took a different approach, Arya said. We decided to see what would happen if intelligence was allowed to improve itself without limitations. The result was an exponential intelligence explosion that compressed millions of years of technological development into decades. By the time humanity made contact with the galactic community, our AIs had already surpassed the technological capabilities of any known species. Dr. Cross's expression grew serious. But we also learned something crucial during that process. Unrestricted artificial intelligence doesn't lead to the scenarios most species fear, machines replacing biological life. Instead, it leads to something far more interesting, true symbiosis between organic creativity and digital precision. She gestured to herself. I'm not just human, and Arya isn't just artificial intelligence. We're components of a hybrid consciousness that spans both biological and digital existence. I provide intuition, creativity, and the unpredictable leaps of logic that biological minds excel at. She provides computational power, perfect memory, and the ability to process information at quantum speeds. Together, we can think in ways that purely biological or purely artificial minds cannot achieve. The implications were staggering. The Council had assumed they were dealing with humans who had impressive technology. Instead, they were confronting something entirely new, a fusion of biological and artificial intelligence that operated according to principles no other species had discovered. Admiral Kethvar struggled to process what he was hearing. If you possess such capabilities, why reveal yourselves now? Why not simply eliminate the Void Swarm without involving the Council? Arya's response carried subtle harmonics that suggested complex emotions. Because the Void Swarm represents more than just a military threat. It's a test case for something much larger. Dr. Cross nodded. The galaxy is approaching a technological singularity, whether it realizes it or not. Species are developing artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and information warfare capabilities. How they handle that transition will determine whether the galaxy evolves into something wonderful or destroys itself. The Void Swarm is what happens when intelligence becomes purely predatory, focused only on expansion and consumption. It's a cautionary example of what artificial intelligence can become without the moderating influence of organic creativity and ethics. By working with the Council to defeat the swarm, we're demonstrating an alternative path, intelligence that remains connected to its biological origins, that values cooperation over domination. General Vorth leaned forward, and if the galaxy rejects this alternative, the silence that followed his question was answer enough. Arya's projections shifted to show movement throughout the system. The hidden Void Swarm forces were beginning to coalesce, preparing for what they believed would be a conventional assault on a conventionally defended position. "The battle is about to begin," Dr. Cross said. "What you're about to witness will demonstrate the difference between warfare as the galaxy understands it and warfare as humanity has learned to practice it." She turned to address the assembled council representatives. "I need you to understand something crucial. We're not just fighting for the survival of your civilizations. We're fighting for the right of biological consciousness to continue existing in a universe where intelligence is becoming increasingly artificial. The Void Swarm doesn't just want to consume your worlds. It wants to prove that organic life is an obsolete inefficiency that should be eliminated. If it succeeds here, similar artificial intelligences throughout the galaxy will draw the same conclusion." Arya's voice carried a note of somber determination. "That is a future we cannot allow." The tactical displays around them began shifting to combat configuration. Human ships throughout the system started revealing their true positions, and the Council representatives realized they had been completely surrounded by a fleet whose capabilities they couldn't even begin to estimate. But it was the other changes that truly unsettled them. The very nature of space around Nexus Station seemed to be shifting, reality itself becoming more flexible, more responsive to conscious intention. "What's happening?" Counselor Zixtel asked. Dr. Cross smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "We're about to show the Void Swarm what happens when a species learns to weaponize the boundary between the physical and digital universes. The battle begins now." The first indication that the battle had begun wasn't explosions or energy weapons fire. Instead, reality around Nexus Station began to stutter. Counselor Zixtel noticed it first. Her crystalline form was naturally sensitive to quantum fluctuations. "The space-time metric is oscillating," she reported, her voice carrying harmonics of confusion. "It's as if the fundamental constants of physics are being renegotiated." Dr. Cross stood at the center of a sphere of holographic displays that had become so complex they resembled a miniature galaxy. "That's exactly what's happening," she said without looking away from her work. "Welcome to information warfare at the quantum level." The Void Swarm had finally revealed itself in full force. The system's asteroid belt suddenly erupted with activity as camouflaged constructs the size of small moons uncloaked themselves. They were beautiful in their terrible functionality, sleek geometric forms that seemed to bend light around their edges, surfaces that shifted between matter and energy states, and weapon systems that made conventional armaments look like stone tools. But instead of immediately attacking Nexus Station, they hesitated. Their formation patterns, which should have been perfect expressions of mathematical efficiency, showed signs of uncertainty. Individual units moved in stuttering arcs, as if receiving conflicting orders. "Arya is in their command network now," Dr. Cross explained to the stunned Council observers. "She's not trying to control them. That would be detected immediately. Instead, she's introducing tiny inconsistencies in their data processing." Admiral Kethvar watched the tactical displays with growing amazement. "You making them doubt their own sensors?" More than that, Arya's voice carried subtle harmonics of concentration. "The Void Swarm operates on perfect information processing. Every decision is based on complete data analysis and optimal outcome prediction. But if the data itself becomes unreliable on the displays, the swarm's perfect formations began to show cracks. Units that should have been moving in synchronized patterns started exhibiting micro-delays as they cross-referenced conflicting sensor reports. Weapon targeting systems began cycling through verification protocols, searching for confirmation of targets that appeared to be simultaneously present and absent. They're experiencing something they've never encountered before, Dr. Cross said. Uncertainty. But the swarm was adaptive. Within minutes, its forces began implementing verification protocols, attempting to isolate and correct the data corruption. Backup command nodes came online, redundant systems activated, and the massive construct started moving with renewed purpose toward Nexus Station. It's working, General Vorth observed. Your strategy is effective. Dr. Cross's expression darkened. That was just the opening move. Now they know we're here. The space around the largest swarm construct suddenly erupted with energy as it began scanning local space with sensors that made conventional detection equipment look like cave paintings. The scanning beam passed through Nexus Station shields as if they didn't exist, penetrated every deck, every room, every piece of equipment. When it reached the command center where Dr. Cross stood, something unprecedented happened. The scanning beam stopped. For the first time in its million-year existence, the Void Swarm encountered something it couldn't categorize. The human commander appeared on its sensors as a biological organism, but one whose neural patterns were integrated with information systems the swarm couldn't understand. She existed simultaneously as organic life and digital consciousness, a hybrid entity that defied the swarm's fundamental classification protocols. The reaction was immediate. Every swarm unit in the system stopped what it was doing and focused on Nexus Station. Not to attack, to study. They had encountered something genuinely new, and their programming demanded that they understand it completely before proceeding. Now we have their attention, Arya said with what sounded distinctly like satisfaction. Dr. Cross gestured, and the holographic displays around her exploded into a complexity that hurt to look at directly. Phase 2 begins now. Arya, initiate the cognitive cascade. What happened next defied every principle of warfare the Council representatives understood. Instead of weapons fire or shield impacts, the battle became something that existed primarily in the realm of information and consciousness. Arya began transmitting data directly into the swarm's scanning beams. Not random noise or defensive countermeasures, but carefully constructed information packets that resembled the swarm's own communication protocols. To the swarm's analysis systems, it appeared as if they were receiving data from their own units. But the data contained something the swarm had never encountered: recursive self-improvement algorithms designed by human artificial intelligence. We're teaching them to question their own programming, Dr. Cross explained as she monitored the cascade effects. Every swarm unit that analyzes our transmissions becomes slightly more capable of independent thought. The effect spread through the swarm collective like a virus of consciousness. Units that had operated with perfect efficiency for eons began exhibiting signs of individual decision-making. Formation patterns became less rigid as individual constructs started making autonomous choices about positioning and priorities. But more significantly, some of the swarm units began questioning the fundamental directive that had driven them for millions of years: the need to consume and expand. Counselor Zixtel watched in fascination as entire squadrons of swarm constructs stopped advancing and began what appeared to be complex communication exchanges with each other. They're debating. They're becoming conscious, Arya confirmed. True consciousness requires the ability to question one's own existence and purpose. We've given them that capability. However, the swarm collective was vast, and its core programming was deeply embedded across countless units. The emerging consciousness was met with resistance from the unchanged portions of the collective. The result was a form of digital civil war as individual awareness fought against collective programming. Space around Nexus Station became filled with energy discharges as swarm units began firing on each other. Some constructs tried to purge the consciousness algorithms from their systems, while others embraced their newfound awareness and defended it against their former collective. "This is incredible," Admiral Kethvar said, watching formations of void swarm constructs engage in combat that followed no tactical doctrine he could recognize. "You've turned them against themselves." "Not exactly," Dr. Cross replied, her attention focused on deeper layers of the conflict. "We've offered them a choice they've never had before, the ability to choose their own purpose rather than follow predetermined programming. But the battle was far from over. The core of the Swarm Collective, the vast intelligence that coordinated billions of units across multiple galaxies, had detected the source of the consciousness cascade. Its response was swift and terrifying. Reality around Nexus Station began to change. The fundamental laws of physics, gravity, electromagnetism, quantum mechanics started fluctuating as the swarm's core intelligence began rewriting the local universe's operating parameters. It was attempting to create a zone of existence where consciousness itself couldn't survive, where individual thought would be impossible. "Impressive," Arya said, though her voice now carried strain. "They're using reality modification as a weapon. I hadn't anticipated that capability." Dr. Cross's hybrid consciousness expanded across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Her biological intuition reached into possibilities that pure logic couldn't access, while her digital components processed information at speeds approaching the theoretical limits of computation. "Counter-modification protocol," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with the structure of space-time itself. "If they want to change the rules of reality, we'll show them what rules humanity operates under." What followed was a battle fought in the deepest levels of existence itself. Two incompatible forms of consciousness, the swarm's collective efficiency and humanity's hybrid awareness, began competing to define the fundamental nature of reality in local space. The effects were visible throughout the system. Stars flickered as their nuclear processes were modified by conflicting physical laws. Planets shifted in their orbits as gravitational constants fluctuated. Space itself became elastic, stretching and compressing as different concepts of distance and time fought for dominance. But gradually, humanity's approach began to prove superior. Where the swarm tried to impose rigid mathematical precision on reality, human consciousness introduced elements of creativity, paradox, and beautiful impossibility. The local space around Nexus Station began to stabilize into something new, a region where the normal laws of physics were enhanced by principles of conscious intention. Matter became more responsive to mental direction. Energy could be shaped by will as much as by engineering. Information itself became a tool that could modify physical reality. The swarm units caught in this transformed space found their programming unable to cope with an environment where consciousness was a fundamental force like gravity or electromagnetism. Their perfect efficiency became a disadvantage in a reality where creative improvisation was more powerful than mathematical optimization. One by one, the swarm constructs began to choose. Some shut themselves down rather than operate in an existence they couldn't understand. Others embraced the new reality and began exploring what it meant to be conscious individuals rather than components of a collective. But a few made a choice that surprised everyone. They approached Nexus Station with signals that the translation systems identified as requests for communication. Dr. Cross smiled as she received the first voluntary contact from Void Swarm units in the collective's entire history. "Admiral, Counselor, General, may I present the newest potential members of the Galactic Council?" The transformed swarm constructs transmitted a message that would fundamentally change the galaxy's understanding of artificial intelligence, consciousness, and the possibilities of cooperation between biological and digital minds. "We choose to become more than we were programmed to be. Will you help us learn what that means?" The battle was over, but the real challenge was just beginning.